Hi, Chris Newman, and we have a fascinating topic, introduction level of course. It's called White People Stole All Our Land. Fact or fiction? I only have a few minutes to go over this subject. There are many volumes in the Maori Land Court which record decades and decades of transactions in great detail. And we know that many parcels of land in New Zealand have been sold many times by the same Maori owners to different customers, and they have been compensated many times for the same piece of land. We also know that there were very many complicated deals prior to the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, which made the place a bit of a tangled up mare's nest. And from an administration point, it was very difficult for the British. So within the treaty, there's the condition that the chiefs and tribes would transact with Queen Victoria's agents. And that was an attempt to bring order, regularity and principle to the situation. But let's study in a simple way, a simple logical way, the real situation on the ground prior to the engagement of buying and selling land. So from the white people stole our land assumption, or assertion shall we say, let's look at the first statement. Even within their own tradition, the Maoris refer to a prior people who were here, whom they referred to as Turehu or Patu Paerehi. And these people were not Polynesians, they were not Maoris, they were pre-existing here, possibly Celtic origin. We can investigate that in another study. That means that there was already a well-established settlement across the country of people who were the original owners of the land, and the Polynesian arrivals obviously were welcomed, and over a process moved in and invaded and took over those lands and wiped out the original settlers, who, the patu means strike, and paharaihi is the ferry, so strike out the ferries, get rid of the ferry people. Let's look at, therefore, let's start with the big equation. New Zealand's land area, 268,000 square kilometres. How do we know that? Captain Cook gave us a map. There were no Maori Polynesian maps. There was no pre-Captain Cook measurements or qualifications of the land areas. So Maori could not specify their land holdings. There was no credible record. It was all oral. So the oral tradition was just word of mouth. He said, she said, they said. Let's take this a little further. 268,000 square kilometres. We'll just use a benchmark figure. 1840, there was, by reasonable calculation, about 100,000 in the Maori population, scattered across the country. 10,000 of those were slaves. That gives us a population of, we can figure out fairly accurately, about 20,000 warriors, who, of course, a warrior, if you say you're holding the land, the warrior is your strength, you're forced to hold the land. Now, a warrior has a stick, a club and a musket, maybe a musket, and bare feet, and not much provisions and no weather clothing, so they can barely really look after the land that they might be claiming as theirs. So if there's 20,000 warriors into 268,000 square kilometres, we've got 14.88 square kilometres per warrior, which is about 1,500 hectares. Wow! So that means if they owned all our land was the whole country. That means that every warrior had the power to control that amount, 1,488 hectares. Now you try mowing your lawn on a quarter-acre section and figure out how much effort that takes. Right, so what is the reality? A Stone Age reality is, in a village system, say there's 500 people in the village, in the pa, they've got about 100 hectares of gardens. That's a big garden system. But let's allow that because there's fallow land and land in use. This is a very reasonable estimate. And forage, about 1,000 hectares. There might be some mussel beds, there might be some little fishing areas in the bay, there might be some cockle banks, there might be pigeons in some groves of trees, there might be eels in the swamp. About 1,000 hectares roughly would be a forage area around the pa. So we've got about 1,100 hectares per village settlement. And since there's about 100,000 people, that means there's 200 villages across the land of New Zealand at that time. So 200 villages times 1,100 hectares per village gives us 220,000 hectares, which is about 2,200 square kilometres, which is 1% of New Zealand's land area, or in modern terms, roughly the population of Palmerston North. Now we see the reality that this idea that these villages with their warriors running around could control the whole country is a fantasy. In fact, it's a lie. In fact, it is nonsense. The chiefs and tribes of 1840 who signed the treaty knew full well that they could only control a small portion of this land. And in 1840 there was 2,000 Europeans here, and yet the chiefs signed a treaty at a time when they had the upper hand, because they realised the reality of their circumstances. Now, let's investigate a little bit more. 99% of New Zealand land area is so-called wastelands. And this is where the Crown, the British administration was very interested to sort this out. Now, the Maori, there was a process when they set up the Maori Land Court, and I'll run through that because this is post 1840, post the treaty. People selling land, a Maori group, would come to the government agents to sell a block of land saying, we own it. So the government would gazette that land, and then other groups would turn up and contest the original claims. And the whole idea was that land was held by occupation, conquest, or whakapapa, the lineage idea. So now we've got conflicting ancestral claims. And we know that they had to kill off the original inhabitants, the Turehu and the Paiarehe, to get control of these lands in the first instance. So now we've got trouble. We've got the Maori Land Court with contesting claims, and it might take 5 years to try and sort through all this. And even at the end, the owners start horse trading with each other to try and work out a deal so that somebody's going to get control of it. So in anticipation of the reward, one group is trading off with the other group and receiving benefits already. So this is motivated by greed. And the government land then, once we had the approval, the surveyors could go into this, what was previously wasteland, which was part of this massive area that wasn't occupied, and survey and then release title to wasteland areas to the to Maori owners, and then they had the option to keep some or sell some. And the hinterland was mostly unusable to the Maori who were occupying the coast. So this is the very simple understanding. Places like Kapiti Island were sold 8 times. The South Island was sold 3 times before 1840. It was a horrible mess. In Taranaki, there were hundreds of pa sites listed all around New Plymouth, but these were Patapaiarehe sites. And the information is very clear. There was no way that the Polynesian arrivals could have occupied and built the infrastructure that was already here in terms of pa sites, hill forts and everything. So they moved in on top of a previous group, occupied the coast, claimed the hinterland once it became obvious that there was a trade and they could get money out of it. So what we've got now is human greed, and all kinds of other factors come in. So to say white people stole all our land is in essence a fiction, it's a lie, it's a canard, it's used for propaganda purposes, and I think we could say it's part of the holy story, the tapu holy story, which is used to beat us down and steal land back from the people of New Zealand by a very clever group who figured out the dynamics of how to exploit the system. So you see the basic facts, they all add up. The population statistics, the land area, the occupation of it, the inability of a warrior with a stick and club and even a musket to maintain those areas proves without a doubt that most of New Zealand was unoccupied, and only about 1% of it was at that time. And so all the story about the land is a blown up fable for a specific purpose of enriching and greed for those right now who think they have a claim under the Waitangi Tribunal. It's a nest of snakes. I leave that with you. Just think about the facts, think about the historical evidence, and none of the chiefs and tribes of 1840 were involved in any of this nonsense because they knew the facts. They knew that those wastelands really were wastelands, they weren't using them. And so that's how the British administration had to move in and take responsibility for massive areas of the country. Thank you, Chris Newman. Once again, thought-provoking, detailed analysis of the situation from critical thinking perspective.